Hi, I'm Adam. Now, you know when someone is good at photography, people often describe them as having the eye, as if it's some God-given gift. Now, I don't believe it is, and in today's video, I'm going to give you the secret to finding and framing great subjects so people start saying that about you. So let's first head out and about and capture a new image which will give some context to what we're talking about. And it's this image actually that was the inspiration for this video. It was also a fantastic day out with Paul G. Johnson, and it's great to be able to get out with friends again, isn't it? So let's go. Right, so I am set up for my first shot and I'm photographing a waterfall just here, and it's just instantly grabbed my attention because of the shape of the rock, which is creating a similar shape in the water, and that's what's really grabbed my attention here, because I was discussing with Paul as we were walking down that I don't always find gorges like this with just streams and waterfalls all that interesting all the time, because I feel like sometimes the water can just lead us into essentially nothing, just a distant bit of the woodland. But here that's not the case, and I want to try and make essentially a portrait of this waterfall itself. So rather than the waterfall being a leading line, it becomes the subject. Now, I had to climb down these rocks a little bit, so the camera is half perched in the water. You can hear how loud that is, but it looks fantastic. And then I've got these trees just up above it, which may or may not form part of my composition. So one of the things I talk about a lot, especially recently, is when you are composing an image, we need to decide what we are going to put inside the four walls of our frame. What we're going to include in it, but also what are we going to exclude from it as well. And that's sometimes just as important, because it can really shape the story that we're trying to tell, and that's exactly what I'm faced with here. However, the beauty of digital photography is that if you're not sure when you're at the scene, like I'm not quite sure now, is do both. So I'm going through a variety of focal lengths with the camera at the moment. Essentially, one a little bit closer in, which just focuses on the rocks and the waterfall itself, and then one that's a little bit wider that gets that tree in there and puts the waterfall into a little bit more context. But in both images though, the waterfall is the main subject, but it's just how much are we excluding from the frame, and I'm not sure, so I'm going to do both. But then I have the technical issue. So conditions are interesting. It's not sunny, but it's very bright. The first thing I've done is to pop the polarizer on the front of the camera, and that's doing a beautiful job of taking the sheen off the rock, which is wet and reflecting the light. I don't want that in there because I want the shape of that water to be the main thing about this photograph. And to put the emphasis on that, I'm underexposing slightly because the water is so bright and the rock is so dark. I want to exploit that contrast essentially. So by underexposing the image across the whole frame, the water will still be nicely exposed, the rock will be very dark, I'll have that moody feel which almost creates like a natural vignette around that waterfall, and that's how it's going to work. I then want just the shape, I don't want all the detail of the water, so I've got the 6-stop filter in the front here, which is giving me a 4-second exposure. I'd like it to be 2 seconds probably for this, but I've already bumped my ISO up to 320, and I don't particularly want to go any higher than that at the moment. And then at f8, because that's going to give me enough depth in the image, and then it's a case of 2-second timer focusing on the waterfall itself. That then exposes for those 2 seconds, 4 seconds even, and there we go. Let's have a look. It's so nice. It's got that real contrasty feeling of the white froth of the water, the dark surrounding, And on this wider shot that I've just taken here, got that bit of light and depth coming from the trees and the woodland in the distance. So yeah, think about what you're going to put in your frame, think about what you're going to put out of it or exclude from it, and that's going to lead hopefully to better compositions. So let's break this down a bit, because finding and photographing great subjects is hard, but the secret is to look for interesting shape and form and apply these elements to your frame in the most complementary way. But shape and form are not the same thing. Shape, as an artistic element, describes the 2D objects in our frame. As we flatten the 3D world, we're often going to end up with various 2D shapes in our frame, like squares and rectangles, but also triangles, which for some reason are particularly attractive to our eye. Now, form describes the objects in our frame that have a 3D appearance due to the shading created by the light as it interacts with that object. If you were drawing a picture, you would have to add this shading with your pencil or brush, but in photography, we capture this naturally. But the challenge then becomes to identify those things at the scene and then position them in our frame in the most interesting and appealing way. With both shape and form, it can be geometric, like triangles and spheres, but also organic, which includes everything else like trees and clouds and leaves. In this scene, it was the contrasting geometric shapes that initially attracted me between the sphere form of the rocks against the more sort of triangular shapes that existed in the water. And that's why I first thought about that sort of tighter composition, closer in to emphasize that contrast. But when we zoomed out, we also had the contrast with the organic forms of the trees above, and it also creates that nice sense of depth and context that we discussed. Let's look at a couple more examples. This is one of my favourites from last year that I made in some very challenging Lake District conditions. It's an image that does not require depth, and because of the snowy conditions and the longer lens that I used, everything in there appears very 2D, and it's the interesting shapes that attracted me and makes the shot, where they are created in the contrast between that white snow and the bare rock and the tree. With this one, on the other hand, it was the organic form that attracted me, particularly in the clouds and the mountains, and they are made all the more interesting by that light coming in from the right, creating some fascinating shading that emphasizes those forms. So if you are ever struggling for compositions or subjects to photograph, start to look for interesting shapes and forms in your environment and think about how they contrast each other and look at how the light interacts with them. You can also look back at your existing photographs and figure out where you might have already done this subconsciously. Practice this enough though, and you will soon be making some unique and impressive photography. So I've got a couple of exciting things to tell you about. The first being that I'm going to start doing a live stream on this channel. I'm going to attempt to do it weekly, but I talked the other week about YouTube being difficult to do, particularly with some of the troll-like comments. So I've not been replying to as many comments because often they don't make me feel very good. However, I'm very aware that there's some great people in this community that follow this channel, and I'd like to have more interaction with those people. And I think a live stream is a nice way to do that. It's going to be there's going to be a slight formula to it, a little bit of tutorial stuff, a little bit of interview stuff with different people, and then live Q&A with you. So please do subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell as well so you know when that's going to be going out. But I'm aiming for Thursdays at 7 o'clock. The first one might come this week if I can figure out all the technical aspects. So subscribe and notification bell, and you'll be hopefully joining me on that. Now, the second thing, in line with what we've been talking about today, is I am going into production this week on a new course, basically. It's going to be called the Art of Photography Masterclass, and it will be sitting on the Raw Room and serve as a slightly more intermediate or advanced course to complement the Landscape Photography Masterclass that already exists there. So if you haven't seen any of the Raw Room content, there's hours and hours and hours of stuff on there. Hit the link down below. You can get a 7-day free trial, and then the Art of Photography Masterclass will be on there in a month or so, something like that. So check it out, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Go ahead and try some of that stuff yourself. I'll clear my throat, and I'll see you on another one very, very soon. I'm Adam. This is First Man Photography. Out.